morning. You can hear me all right? Great. Should I go closer? How's that? Thank you so much for having me. I'm very grateful that Reverend Molly and Reverend Keith and Susan have invited me to participate in this season of justice, in particular to talk about housing justice. I also just want to say, I think I'm allowed to say this, I do love church. I hope none of my people are watching. I find ritual to be beautiful, stunning, meaningful, wherever it emerges. And so even when it isn't from my tradition, my heart opens in the space of your prayers, and I thank you for inviting me into them this morning. In order for me to talk about housing justice from a Jewish perspective, I need to give you a little bit of my perspective on how I understand a few key assertions of the Bible, of the Torah. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to go back to the reading from Deuteronomy. The first is that the master of the world, God, is a creator in the same way that an artist creates a painting or a sculptor sculpts. There is a vision, something that comes into the heart, mixes with intellect, skill, and then is put down on paper. But art is trial and error. Every artist is looking for the right formula, and there will be, for artists along the way, places in which we chisel backwards or forwards, erase, and put back in. It is no different for God's creation of the world and that which inhabits it. God's perfection comes precisely because God's self, is imperfect. Here's how we know this. God created a garden for the first human beings. It did not work out. God then tried giving human beings the rest of the world. It did not work out. And God destroyed God's first creation with a flood. Right after, God makes a vow to God's self, saying, I'm not going to destroy again, but I do need to start again. Even though God's self, in the book of Genesis, at the end of chapter 6, explicitly says, I regret creating the human being, we're here. So God needs a new image, a new plan. And God decides to create again on a smaller scale, this time with Abraham and Sarah. And the formula for God's new creation, the creation that would become the rest of the Torah, the 5 books, the Bible, the beginning of the Bible, the formula would be a people, a land, a home, and a law, the Torah. A trifecta, each and every part necessary for God's next creative state in this world. A people comes from Abraham and Sarah, a land, Israel, Canaan, a home, a place to call home, and a law, the Torah, or much of the books of Exodus and the book of Deuteronomy. That's number one. Number two, we are very much godlike in very particular ways. When we are created, the Bible tells us, Vayivra Elohim et ha'adam b'tzalmo b'tzelem Elohim bara oto. And God created the human in God's image. In the image of God, God created the first human. Vayitzer Adonai Elohim et ha'adam afar min ha'adama. God formed the human from the dust of the earth. Vayipach be'apav nishmat chayim, and God breathed into us the breath of life. And when we receive that breath from the master of the world, that divine flow, we become nefesh chaya, a living soul, which is to say, what God gave human beings in that breath was just enough divinity to become partners with God in the creation and recreation of the world. We are each of us created in God's image, which of course demands that each of us treat every single other as if they are walking around with the master of the world inside of them. Because they are, because we are breathing it in and out in every moment. And the last piece, in order, I think, for you to fully understand where we are coming from on housing, is that the Torah is the first story in recorded human history, the very first story in recorded human history in which ultimate power emerges on behalf of the marginalized and the oppressed and does not side with power. I'm going to say that one again. The Bible records the first time in history that we know of in which ultimate power, God, sides with the marginalized and the oppressed, and not those who are in power. In every other story of humanity, we would have expected God to be on Team Pharaoh. But that is not how the Bible tells our shared story. God is on Team oppressed. Necessarily as a rule. God responds to the cries first and foremost of suffering. God is necessarily in opposition to the forces of power who create the conditions for that suffering. So, quick recap. God creates and recreates. It is trial and error. We who have been imbued with some divine-like qualities, we are made in God's image, become partners in that creation and recreation of the world, and therefore together we, with a little bit of God in us, and God with a lot of God in God, we together take the mantle of responding first and foremost, as you have said so beautifully throughout this service several times already, we first and foremost use our God-like qualities to respond to the marginalized, the oppressed, to hear the cries of suffering, and not side with the powers that be, which create the conditions for that suffering, but with those who are suffering in order that we can all be forces of redemption in the world. That's sort of my core belief. How does that tie into housing, and how does that tie in to Deuteronomy? Remember, God recreated with a people, the Israelites, a law, the Torah, and a land, Canaan, called then Israel now. And so in preparation for entering the land, the people, redeemed from slavery, with its law received as a revelation at Mount Sinai, is about to complete the trifecta, to find home, necessary for the flourishing of human beings. And that is when God says to them, look, one, I am one. You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your might. And these words which I have been commanding you, this Torah, this Bible, you will take them with you wherever you go. They will be at the center of your home, and they will be at the center of your vacation home, of your traveling, of your moving. You will remember them when you go to sleep and when you wake up. And most importantly, you will write them on the doorposts of your house upon your gates. That is called a mezuzah. A mezuzah is a tiny scroll of this very passage that most Jewish homes will have on the right lintel of the doorway. this passage. It goes on, though, because the moment in which we are to talk about how to make a home sacred, we have to remind everybody of why home is sacred. When the Lord your God shall bring you into the land, shall bring you home, that land that is to be intertwined with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, your ancestors, you will be privileged with the homes that are there, with that which has been built before you even arrived. Houses filled with good things, things you did not fill, vineyards, olive trees that you did not plant. And it is in that moment precisely, the moment in which you experience the bounty of the world, that I am most worried you will forget me. Therefore yourselves, and from whence you came, from your place of being marginalized and oppressed as slaves in Egypt. See, oftentimes the Torah is just, or the Bible is just speaking to the natural inclinations that we as human beings have. When times are good, it is difficult to remember some of the pain. Some of the pain we experienced that allow us to be in the places we are now. And when it comes to the homes we are in, it is the contention of the Bible that every moment of bounty we experience in our own homes is to remind us of God, and that every other human being is created in God's image and deserving of that same bounty. It is the home that this is most easily forgotten, because our homes necessarily have walls built up to keep us sometimes away. We call it safety. Who's in, who's out. God says the gifts you receive in this world are just as likely to numb you as they are to provoke gratitude. Be careful. That which you receive never truly belongs to you, but to the master of the world. Jewish law codifies this. Jewish law, after the Bible, for thousands of years, written by human beings trying to understand how to apply the teachings of the Bible in every age through law, says that mezuzah that you are to put on your door, that mezuzah that is to remind you every time you walk in that it is a gift you have received, doesn't mean you haven't worked hard to earn that gift, but it is still a gift that not everybody possesses. That mezuzah has requirements. It can only be put on a home. And here's how Judaism, according to a 12th century legal code, defines the home. There are 10 conditions that a home must have. Upon reaching these conditions, you may put up a mezuzah. You may put up the scroll of Deuteronomy 6 on the doorpost. 1, it has to be of a certain size such that people can fit in it, a dignified size. It has to have 2 doorposts. It has to have a lintel. It requires a sturdy roof. Most importantly, a home is asui ledirat adam v'asui ledirat kavod. That a home is to be made for the occupancy of a human being with dignity imbued throughout that home. It is a dirat keva. It is not a transient home, it is a permanent home. In order for me to put the scrolls on my door, according to Jewish law, I have to have a home defined by enough size for dignity, enough safety for dignity, enough protection from the elements for dignity, Only then, when I have created a non-transient space, may I put up a mezuzah. And the moment in which I have been privileged or earned or all of it together, that moment in which all of it comes together is the moment in which my blessing requires others receive it as well, says Deuteronomy. This city's in trouble when it comes to housing. It is in trouble because the power that I don't think the master of the world sides with still believes that it is okay in the middle of winter to remove people from their undignified homes back out into the cold to find another park. Could wait till April. The disappearance of affordable housing in DC, Kate Coventry, another leader in WIN, writes, particularly for larger family, the disappearance of affordable housing puts stress on family budgets. People are always at risk of eviction, and the stress is disproportionately felt by Black and brown residents. 90% of people in public housing, and our public housing here in DC is in poor condition. 90% of the people in public housing, 85% of individuals experiencing homelessness in the district are not white. And national advocates, those who have been studying homelessness around the country, they have concluded each and every time that there is one solution, enough affordable housing. When there is enough affordable housing, homelessness drops. Washington, D.C. is at least 20,000 units short of the housing it needs for its low-income renters alone. As part of the Washington Interfaith Network, and in partnership with Chevy Chase Presbyterian, Temple Sinai, Addis Israel, and a number of others, we work with the Ward 3 Upper Northwest Housing Justice Team. We have set an agenda for this city, an agenda based on our values and our faith, tied directly to housing outcomes. Specifically, the Chevy Chase Civic Core is a target for more density and more affordable units. Here's what we have asked from the city: create at least 100 new homes at the Civic Core site, in addition to rebuilding a new library and community center. This is a singular opportunity, our leaders have written, to make a significant statement that the community is serious about breaking from an exclusionary past, a segregated past. We have asked that in that civic core there is mixed income housing that ranges from between 30% of median family income to 80% median family income. Look, with supply and demand, you always look at whether or not the two meet one another where they need to. In our city, the demand is clearly there. It is here. And usually, that will increase supply. But in this case, our case, the only way in which we can push and move power to increase supply, it will only happen if we actually humanize, not demonize, the supply, the very humans, the very creations of God with God inside of them who need housing most. There is space, there is certainly enough money, but is there a will to humanize and not demonize? Reverend Teichert and I wrote together a couple of years ago an article in the Washington Post, in particular around Friendship Heights. This is what we wrote somewhere in that article. We wrote together that we come from different faith traditions, but we share an obligation to revisit the past to understand more fully our present and seed a different future, a future that recognizes our differences and honors our shared humanity. For the moral fiber of any community is not necessarily determined by what its members believe in private, though that is important, but by who and what its policies promote in public. Where there is a wrong, we are obligated to fix it. Where there is an opportunity to do right, we want to seize it. And so what we will ask of everybody here today, and for you to spread the word as well, is to be involved. Friendship Heights, certainly the Chevy Chase Civic Corps, and to continue to raise your voice and demand from those who will be building and rebuilding, to demand that there is enough housing, affordable housing, for all of those divinely created human beings amongst us who are in need. Please, please let them know that from the place of your faith, dignity can only be achieved when dignified housing is offered to those who desperately need it. Roof, protection, space, dignity, and permanence, not transient. Thank you for joining me in that, what I believe is a holy, sacred task that we are called to do from our shared faiths. Kei nihi ratzon, may it be so. Thank you.